keep allowing that as we go on. So today I'm just going to do a quick little land acknowledgement as we begin. Many folks in this space of cultural advocacy and equity work are now coming to an understanding that, for us as Native people for so long, we've been fighting for this acknowledgement of our land reclamation and building out what these strategies look like for land reclamation. And so we have this wonderful opportunity to kind of build this land acknowledgement for you all. So I'm going to share a little snippet of one of the land acknowledgements that we use as AIT, just to kind of give you all a little understanding. And then, if this is something that interests you, this is also something that we provide and help others try to work on as well as they begin that process of helping advocate for Native equity across the city and across the country and so on. So today we bring you here virtually to this space that we know as Yanawana, which means land of the spirit waters in the Bahlat language. Today it is known as San Antonio, Texas. And so this land is traditional lands, homelands of the Aboriginal peoples that the Spanish formerly called the Coahuitecan natives and other Aboriginal people from the land as well. Some of those tribes include the Pawame people, the Bahalat people, the Payaya people, Harame people, Pakawan people, Borado people, and Pampoa people, and so on and so forth. There's about 200 or so different tribes, bands, and clans that knew this place as home, that fall under that umbrella of being called the Coahuitecan natives. This land is also homelands to other Aboriginal tribes like the Estokna people, who call this place Somisek. And so as these Aboriginal people continue their life ways, we want to acknowledge and honor that this is their homelands that we're continuing to operate on, and this will be their lands for generations to come. So we appreciate you all, appreciate your time. I do a quick little acknowledgement or an invocation song, to kind of welcome in those spirits, and then I'll pass it off to my brother Sid. So I hope you all enjoy. I appreciate the time and energy that y'all have given this. So now let's come. Oh, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, Papa Yayum, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, Papa Yayum. Oh, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, oh, Papa Yayum, Papa Yayum. Thank you to the spirit. Thank you to you all for being here with us today. I'll pass it off to my homie Sid.
Thank you, Ramon, and good morning, everyone. At this point, I will go over our norms and agreements, our yes and practice. So we request that we pay attention to how language can validate yes and or negate yes but our experiences. Adapting a yes and practice rewires our brain to validate diverse experiences and perspectives in diverse communities, centering their work around healing. Acquiring the yes and practice as a default to building relationships within our organization and community sparks innovation and paves the way for healing and justice. I will pass this back to Ramon as he read out our purpose for today.
Awesome, much appreciated, Sid. As I share this purpose, this is kind of a quote from our amazing speaker here, Baba Greg. So this is how he feels. He wants you all to engulf yourself in the purpose of this session for today. So in the words of Baba Greg, as part of our healing journey, we want to explore and be self-reflective about our cultural identities and the communities from which we have emerged. Participants will have an opportunity to explore the roots of restorative practices and community healing through a brief explanation of exploration of historic and contemporary cultural practices. So enjoy this conversation with Baba Greg here. We're gonna share a quick little trigger warning with my sister Emma here. Emma?
Good morning, everyone. I think we have that on the next slide. So this presentation does have some sensitive material, images. We know that are tough and to engage with. Just want to be mindful of that you are able to take care of yourself in a way that you need to if something should arise for you. However, we also want to encourage you guys to try to engage with it as much as possible so that we could look at the trauma that we need to in order to make a difference and enact change through confronting confronting these difficult topics, these conversations that need to be had. So go ahead and pass it to Papa Bear. We're gonna let him introduce our speaker for today.
Sorry about that. I'm really glad to have my brother. I want to welcome him to Wanakawa Pupaku Yanawana, this land that commonly known as San Antonio. And I mean, it's really special. He has a gift, of healing communities, and a gift of, being able to walk this earth. And he's going to lead us into this dark forest that a lot of times we need to talk about. But he's also going to lead us into the light of healing and what we need to do. And one of the things that we're constantly remembering about the conquest, and this country settled on Native American land and made Black slaves work on that land. We have a parallel that has come to the point where Bubba, Greg, and I crossed paths. And I think that we forged a really strong bond in this healing work, between a Native American Indian man and an African American Black man from the West Coast, from Oakland. And I was blessed to bless his home. I got to stay over an evening and break bread with him. And the house that he has is a 3-story beautiful house. If you ever Google West Oakland neighborhood, you'll see the architecture of these houses. I mean, they foreshadow the King William area, which everybody's familiar with. But it was an interesting story that one day he was outside tending his garden, fixing up the front of his house, and these people came by and looked at him and said, "Do you know who owns this house?" And he stood up and he says, "Well, I am the owner." And it's those kind of things that when we see a person of color, we can't fathom that a Black man would own a house like he has. And it's constantly happening again and again of this oppression that we get triggered. But him being the man that he is, he was able to speak with them and give them some history of that community. So with that, I'd like to welcome my brother here, and I'm just really glad that you accepted our invitation to be part of this. And Ashe, my brother.
Baba Greg, I think you're muted.
Ibache Ilaorun. Ibache Iworun. Ibache Ariwa. Ibache Gusu. Ibache Iguni Dilimi. Iguni Dilimi. Iguni Dilimi. Ibache Eshuadara. Ibache Yeye. Ibache Baba. Ibache to all my relations. Good morning. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you this morning. In the words of the Yoruba people that I recited, it's a morning prayer welcoming our ancestors from the east, the west, the north, and the south. Our ancestors who represent the crossroads at Shu, at Legba, who are the ones who give us choices. We give honor and praise to all of our elders, all of our ancestors, to the women, to the men, to the children yet to be born. So as we do this work today, I want to invite you to think about your ancestors. Think about somebody in your past, in your history, who helps you understand yourself better, who helps you understand your work better. And we're going to center ourselves on these three questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? And why am I here? I want to thank Papa Bear for the invitation this morning to share a little bit. He and I gotten to be friends doing the work, as he mentioned. He came to Oakland to visit, and that story I shared with him, it's funny because the people in the car weren't from this neighborhood, and they, in addition to asking me who owned the house, they said, I played with them for a minute. I got a little bit of a trickster in me, a little bit of coyote, a little bit of Anansi, and so I said, well, I don't know. And they said, well, do you think he's willing to sell the house? Do you think what, do you have any idea how much it's worth? And I said, and then I finally said, well, I live here with my children and my family. And they were a little embarrassed by it, but that's the kind of thing, as Papa Bear says it, when we encounter someone new, when we have this first sort of encounter with people, what are our perceptions? How do we approach it? What is it that we're thinking about as we meet people? And so this morning, I want to appreciate my encounter with Papa Bear here in California at the Sons and Brothers Camp a few years ago. I want to thank Frank and Emma and Ramon and Sid this morning for helping pull this presentation together. And when I think about meetings, when I think about first encounters, I always wonder, like my imagination has me thinking about what was it like when those first African Americans who arrived on the shores of North America, at whatever period it was, whether it was in 1619, whether it was before that, because there is some historical record to say that Africans got here much earlier than Columbus did, especially given the fact that Cristobal Colombo was lost, didn't know where he was going, thought he was going to India and ended up on this side, says something about the level of knowledge that Europeans had at that time. But I wonder about those first encounters. I wonder about, well, when we first met, if we didn't speak the same verbal language, did we speak the same song? Did we speak the same dance? Did we speak the same medicine? And so as we meet today, I just encourage you to think about these questions, this self-reflection about what is your medicine? What is it that you're bringing to bear on this as we explore our history a bit together, that our interwoven history is inescapable, and that we know that healing can be found in our collective story. So this morning, as we spend a little time together, I invite you to think about those questions as we go along. I've got my friend Ramon is going to advance the slides for me. So I'm going to say next slide. And we're also sort of praying this morning that the technology works for us. So Ramon, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So I want to thank you again to invite you to take a deep breath this morning. Inhale and exhale. And just reflect for a moment on the beginnings, on your sacred self, on the origins that shape you, your family, your clan, your community, your familia. The people that we live with, the people who love us, we all come from somewhere. We all come from that divine space. In every tradition, there's some story about how the earth got created, and that we all come from that our lineage is a spiritual one, that our lineage is a sacred one, and that we are connected. We're not just in nature, but we're our nature. We're part of our natural ecology. And so as Mother Earth is suffering through climate change that's caused by human beings, we have to figure out what's our place in all of this. And so as we reflect on that today, and as we take those very precious breaths, we want to acknowledge that there are people who have passed away from COVID, people who have passed away from the problems associated with breathing, and that it's a blessing this morning just to be able to breathe freely. And so I invite you again to recognize and acknowledge your sacred self, that there's a physicality that we all have. We move around the world. We had to get breakfast this morning maybe, or a cup of coffee, but there's also some tending to our spirits that we should always do on a daily basis. All right, let's go to the next slide, Ramon. Thank you. I want to reflect just for a moment as we get into this conversation about the history of African people here. And when I say African people, folks of African descent, people who came from communities for almost 400 years by force into North America. First starting in Brazil, which is where about 40% of all people who were part of the transatlantic slave trade ended up. And then literally, many of them were worked to death. That people lived very short lives, and the slavers would just go get more people, would engage in that illicit, illegal trade and bring more people. So about 40% ended up in Brazil, about 40% ended up in the Caribbean in places like Barbados and Bermuda. If you watch the news this week, I think it was Bermuda or Barbados rather, that just became decolonized from the British Commonwealth this past week. If you think about that long history of colonization and the connection to Europeans in England and Spain and Portugal, that history has a legacy, that history has an impact that we all still feel. And then if we think about 40% in Brazil and South America, 40% in the Caribbean, and then 4% in North America. So my family and my relatives, my closest relatives, because you're my relatives too, but my closest relatives of African descent, we come from about 4% of the people who were brought from West Africa, from the Fula, from the Jola, from the folks that were from the Bight of Benin. And before we left home, before my great grandparents were pulled into that trade, we would sit under trees like this baobab tree. We would often call it, we had names for it, just like in European culture, there's the town square. In Mexico is Zocalo. In Rome, it was the Palace. We called it the Bantaba, this space where we could have a conversation, this space where we could be with each other. And so I want you to imagine yourself being around that tree, sitting under that tree this morning. And a few years ago on a trip that I had to West Africa, I was in the Gambia region, and I was wanting to go to the village where Alex Haley talked about how he found his family, how he found the family of Kunta Kinte, that story that is related to us in Roots. And so I was literally sitting under a big tree along with about 5 or 6 other people, and we were waiting on a taxi. And at that time, there was no Uber, there's no Lyft. We were out in this semi-rural area, and I had already been on a ferry to get across the river, and then we took another car, and then we're waiting on this last car to get to the village of Jufere. And I was sitting under this tree. It was a really hot day, and I was a little nervous. I was by myself, which is unusual for me to be traveling alone, but I was by myself. And so I was a little bit lost in thought, and I looked out on the horizon, and I see a man walking directly toward me. And he's just like a straight line, straight up to me. And I didn't know anybody in that region at that time, right? I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends or family who I knew by name. And this young man named Pierre Gomez, I'll never forget his name, Pierre Gomez. First of all, I wonder how he got a name like that. And probably the Portuguese or somebody in that region, he ends up with that name. But he comes up to me, and without asking me anything else, he looks me in my eyes and says, "What is your mission here?" And it was a really provocative question, because I thought about, well, what is my mission? Am I on vacation? Am I trying to learn more about Jufere? And so I told him I was interested in learning more about the history of this community. I was interested in, as a musician in West African culture, I was interested in playing music. And so he said, "I'm going to be your guide today." And Pierre Gomez made sure that I got to Jufere safely, made sure that, and we got into this taxi that came, and some of you are old enough to remember if you had a kind of what we call a hoopty, an old car that didn't run very well. And basically that car didn't have, the clutch was burned out. So anybody who knows about cars knows that you could get the car rolling and you kind of pop the clutch. And so we had to kind of do a little running start to jump in the car. But all of that began this amazing trip to the village of Jufere. And as I thought about that question has stuck with me. What is my mission? What is your mission on this earth? Why were you sent here? Why are you taking up the space that you take up on the planet? So I invite you again to reflect on that history, reflect on how it is that you're here, and think about what is your mission, and how is your mission informed by the answer to the question, who am I? Where do I come from? and why am I here? We can go to the next slide, Ramon. Thank you. So this notion of Africa, we heard a song. If you came on early, you heard this song by Cesar, Chico Cesar, about Mama Africa, the recognition that all human beings are probably from the Valley of the Mountain of the Moon in East Africa, that lake near Tanzania, Lake Tanganyika, near Mount Kilimanjaro. The oldest human remains have been found there. And the way most anthropologists think about this is that we all as human beings started in Africa, and then we migrated to other parts of the world. Our skin tone began to change, our features changed based on the climate. But we all have some connection to the largest continent, the continent that has every possible mineral and flora and fauna, and we're all connected to it. And even though our families may originate in Mexico or El Salvador or in Massachusetts, wherever it might be, that we all have some connection to our mother, to Africa. Next slide, please. Next slide, there you go. There you go. So in the earliest times of recorded history of African people, we had a lot of ways of communicating. When you look at the pyramids in Egypt, you look at the architecture and the literature that come from that period of human history, starting about 6,000 years ago, we have a recorded history, but we know that before that, that sort of prehistoric moment, that people were moving up and down the Nile Valley region from the highlands in Ethiopia and into the Sudan, that people were at a very early period in human history pretty advanced in their human medicine, in their way of relating to each other, in their way of thinking about life. And there's a fundamental concept that comes out of African history, Ma'at, and it's spelled M-A-A-T. One of our teachers, Malana Karinga, who's among other things, the originator of the Kwanzaa festival. Kwanzaa is based on some ancient African festivals, the yam festivals and harvest festivals all over Africa. That celebration started here in 1965 in the US. And as we learn more about our history and culture, Kwanzaa is one of those centering holiday weeks between Christmas and New Year's that we take a time to reflect on some key values and principles. The principles of Umoja, Kujichagulia, Kuumba, the principles of reciprocity. And so Karinga shares this with us. He says, we are charged as human beings to do several things: to speak truth, to do justice, to act properly, to live in harmony with each other and nature, to be balanced, to practice reciprocity, and recognize and respect the personal, social, divine, and natural order. And so they wrote this in their words. The image of the woman you see with that feather, the feather represents that feather of truth, that is a symbol of Ma'at. And so that every culture has some fundamental medicine, some fundamental set of ideas that keep us healthy. We can go to the next slide. They also had a conception of, human beings as being dual sort of personality, that you had a spiritual self, a ka, and this idea of this human head on this bird represents this idea of the ka, and reuniting with a broader, larger sort of universal spirit called the ba. And the goal of every human life was to reconnect your spirit with this larger spirit. Again, every tradition has some way of thinking about the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, and the intellectual in ways that really begin to connect things up. So if we can go to the next slide, there's so much richness in that history and culture. They were builders, they were family people. When you read the writings that they left behind, and they left a lot of artifacts, a lot of writings, a lot of ways of thinking about the history and culture. What happens when ordinary people get together? Pyramids were built based on a level of organization and civic commitment to building these structures. And often, people will, especially European historians, will stretch it a long way to figure out, well, who built these pyramids? And, there's theories about people came from outer space. And it could just never be that African people got together, organized themselves, quarried the stone, moved those stones up and down the Nile Valley, the Nile River, organize themselves to build these projects. And if you know enough of the history of that region, sometimes like the Pyramid of Giza is this almost perfect architectural achievement. But then they also had mistakes. They also, you see some pyramids that sort of, fell in on themselves because they weren't done right. And so there are lessons in that for us as human beings around our mission here, is sometimes you build, sometimes it falls apart, sometimes you have to start over. And they also left a pretty clear record of what they look like. When you look at the statuary work that's presented here at the Temple of Ramses, these are human beings, these are people, these are African featured folks who did this amazing work and left it as a legacy for all of us, left as a legacy for all human beings. Next slide. We know that every tradition has storytelling, and part of what we're doing today is telling a little bit of stories around who we are, what is our history, how are we here. This woman comes from the West Africa region, probably in the Gambia. She's playing a kora, and she's part of the storytelling tradition. And that tradition of the Jaliba, the griots, they were trained from birth to memorize the history of their communities, the history of the region, the history of the country. And often when you got married or had a naming ceremony for a baby, you would ask a griot, a Jaliba, to come. Sometimes they sang the story, and we go to the next slide, as they sang the story of Sunjata, who was the first sort of legendary king of Mali, who united the country because there were warring factions. They were all fighting each other. And then he basically conquered all of those factions and then gave everyone their freedom. Really interesting, again, metaphor for how we work in human life, how we work in San Antonio neighborhoods and Oakland, that we work to bring people together. And there's all kinds of strategies to use that healing power, that medicine, in terms of how we bring things together. But Sunjata, and the story of Sunjata, is still sung to this day. You can go to villages in the Gambia, villages around West Africa, and where this story is, the young people and elders are reminded of the values that Sunjata and his generation left for the people of Mali. Next slide. So where I want to move us to is, like, when we come out of that history, and that broad, deep history, and I invite you to continue your study of everybody's history, because the more we know about our history collectively, the more we can do in this time to heal ourselves, as Frank talked about, to bring healing to our children in schools, to bring healing in our neighborhoods. Oakland is in great need of healing right now. We are in the middle of a sharp increase in gun violence. We've lost 130 people to homicides this year. Numbers are way up from where they were in the past. And that violence, that fratricide, as my friend George Galvis, who's at Courage, talks about, that is state-sponsored violence, but it's also the disinvestment in our communities. It's also a result of a generational transfer of trauma. That the trauma of the slave trade, the trauma of lynchings and sharecropping, and all of what has happened to Black people still sits in our bodies. And even our hard sciences are telling us that, there's something in at the level of our genetic makeup that carries trauma. And now we have to work, all of us, to address and deal with that trauma. We go to the next slide. It's not a small thing to think about. For hundreds of years, millions of people being brought out of their homes, forced into labor in what I call forced labor camps. Plantations is a nice name for it, but these are forced labor camps, in the same way that the mission schools were forced labor camps here in California. In Senegal, there's an island right at the very western tip of the country, where there was a slave, a so-called slave, and I call my ancestors enslaved Africans. I could reject the term slaves. Slaves were a thing. Slaves were something you can buy and sell, but these were human beings who were brought into spaces like Goree Island. This idea of the door of no return. I had a chance to visit Goree Island years ago, and no matter who you are, you feel the energy of your ancestors when you're in this space. Even at that early stage of our oppression, families were broken up. There was rooms in this building for men. There were rooms in this building for women. There was rooms in this building for children. There was rooms in this building for what they called the incorrigibles, the people who wouldn't follow the directions. And essentially, to break your spirit, they packed you along with others into these very small, dark, dank, filthy, narrow spaces and locked you in there for days and sometimes weeks at a time until your spirit was broken or you really lost your mind. But that notion of the door of no return, many people went through that little space, walked down a plank onto small boats, were loaded onto ships, and never to see home again. never to eat their food, sing their songs with the community, never able to return to their homes. And some people chose to leap off of that plank into the sea and drown themselves rather than go into this thing that we call slavery. Next slide, please. We know, if you've studied this history at all, this is a diagram of how the ships were packed. Spoon fashion is what they call it, like sardines in a can. It was terrible. And these journeys would last sometimes, when you go into Brazil from the Bight of Benin, you know, sometimes as much as 6 months for this journey, sometimes as quick as 3 months, but for whatever amount of time, people were packed in. Often you were in this space with people you didn't share a common language with. But one thing I know to be sure, people figured out how to communicate with each other. People figured out how to sing songs, I would imagine. People figured out a way to tell stories. People figured out a way, just like the civil rights generation movement in the jails of Birmingham and Selma would sing songs, would tell stories, would preach to each other, that no matter what was going on, our human spirit was so resilient that we would continue to work as human beings to comfort each other, to be with each other, even as a person next to you might have gone crazy, or a person next to you may have died, and everybody is almost sleeping in their own excrement. It was a terrible, terrible thing that happened to people. And to assume that you just shake off that trauma once you get off the boat is a serious misconception. Next slide, please. That people were sold, you know, there were ads in newspapers that would advertise for sales that would happen. There were auction blocks. You can go to the next slide. All throughout North America. This is a building that's been preserved in Savannah, Georgia. And you see what the signage says: auction and Negro sales. The fact that human beings were being sold and traded in places like Richmond, Virginia. Richmond was considered to be the center of the slave trade in many ways, because there were slave brokerage houses, the same way you have stock brokerage houses. And there's a very deep connection between Wall Street and the stock market of today and the auction blocks of that time. And Richmond, Virginia people would gather people from different farms and different encampments around that region. And then once they aggregated enough folks, would march people down in Alabama, into Mississippi. I mean, this was a trade that was very lucrative. The wealth of the United States was fundamentally built on this free labor, on the land that was taken from Native Americans, on the labor, the same way that our La Raza family from the South come up into work on farms and in the agricultural industry here in California and elsewhere. Our labor was stolen. Our intellect was stolen. Our ability to procreate was stolen. Go to the next slide, please. And one of the things I'd like for you to really consider, because often we sort of talk about this in a way that doesn't acknowledge our humanity. This photograph comes from the late 1880s. So if you know your American history, you know the Civil War in the US ended in 1865, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were passed shortly after that to outlaw slavery, except for as punishment of crimes. If you look in the Constitution right now, slavery is really still legal for quote, people convicted of crimes. So our penal system, our incarceral system is fundamentally a vestige of those days. But what I want you to pay attention to in this photograph is the people. When you look at this picture, think about what age do you think these young people are? Because this is all young folks. And I thought about this, and and even after slavery ended here in the US, it was still going on in Brazil until 1889. So when people say, oh, this is something that happened a really long time ago, this is in your great-grandparents' generation. This is not, thousands of years ago, like the history of that Nile Valley I shared with you. And so these are youngsters. And for me, when I looked at those 4 young people in the back row, they're sitting up high, and look at that body language. I see that body language right now in Oakland, when I see young people who don't have opportunities for a good education, who don't feel safe in their communities. You see that same kind of body language that looks sad, depressed, anxious. These young people probably wonder, where would they end up? This was a photograph that was taken. It's a rare photograph because generally we don't have a lot of photographs from that time period. It was a British naval ship that intercepted this ship that was still doing slaving somewhere in East Africa. But this trade went on for decades. And some say it still goes on now. There's parts of the world where this trade is still happening. So I want you to just reflect on what would have been like for you as a young person, or if you're a parent, imagine your children having to submit themselves to this kind of experience. What does that do to your spirit? What does that do to your emotional state? Does it stick with you your entire life? Do you shake it off? Do you just kind of get over it? People say, well, it's a long time ago, let's just get over it. But that transfer of trauma is with us today, both the historic and the contemporary aspects. We can go to the next slide. There were people like Ida B. Wells Barnett, who in the next generation, in the 1920s, at the height of lynchings here in the US, it was this explosion of domestic terrorism. And so when people talk about, like what happened on January 6th, the idea that some Americans, white Americans, could take over, quote, their government, a government that belongs to all of us, it's the same sort of energy that Ida B. Wells Barnett would go around the country after having grown up in Memphis, Tennessee as a woman. She witnessed 2 of her friends be lynched simply because they would not sell a successful business to white people in that community. And Ida B. Wells was fearless. She decided that she would be a journalist, that she would report these lynchings, that she would talk to people. She went to towns in the 1920s as a Black woman, often alone, to investigate a lynching, to investigate the allegations against this person and the mob violence that followed, and whether or not the sheriff of that town freely gave that person over to the mob. She armed herself. She had 2 Colt 45 pistols apparently, and dared anybody to mess with her. She was a badass. Let me just say it like that. Ida B. Wells Barnett was that. We go to the next slide. So this is all in the context of the brutality of lynchings. That people were often tortured, their bodies were desecrated. Often the body parts were taken and posted up in store windows to make the point that if you push up against this system of white supremacy, if you push up against any of this, that you could lose your life, your family could lose their lives. I grew up in Jefferson County, Arkansas, a little town called Pine Bluff. And back in the late 1880s, there was a series of lynchings apparently where 23 people were killed in one lynching episode. And their bodies were left to hang for weeks, to make the point that you don't, if you think that you can push up against these sharecroppers who are cheating you every day in terms of your work, against the authorities, you could be accused of a crime, never receive a fair trial by your peers, anything. That if you push up against that you are risking your life. Next slide, please. The harshness of punishment, so-called prisons. This little boy apparently, for whatever he had done, is hogtied on a post, left outside to suffer in the sunshine. George Stinney was the youngest person to be executed in the United States at 12 years old. Turns out that he was accused of something he did not do. And even a few years ago, there were advocates who worked in, I think, South Carolina to clear his name on behalf of his family. Next slide. But we know that this trauma doesn't just go away, right? We know that it takes work. People like Dr. King and others who looked at the trauma associated with poverty. When Dr. King was an activist, he decided to take his family to live in Chicago after working for years in the South. And this is a photograph of him fixing up a dilapidated apartment that he and his family chose to live in for a few weeks in Chicago to demonstrate the poverty that was happening, the trauma of being poor in America. Next slide, please. The freedom riders of that same generation, simply to be able to ride in public accommodations, to be able to move around in the 1960s on buses across state lines, were viciously attacked in places like Selma and in Albany, Georgia. Buses were set on fire, people were beaten. This is the experience that John Lewis and that generation of freedom fighters, Black, white, brown, and otherwise, who were facing in the South during my parents' generation. Let's go to the next slide. Fast forward to Mike Brown's death. Many of you know when Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, his body was left just like those bodies that were swinging from trees that Billie Holiday talked about in Strange Fruit, that it was left in the street for no apparent good reason. So that young people, the elders, had to witness his murder and the after effects of that for hours. in Ferguson. It's difficult for us to look at these photographs, even more difficult to have seen Mike Brown's body for that day in Ferguson, Missouri. Next slide, please. I wanted to share a little bit with you about this young man. This is Brandon Harrison, who is a leader in the state of California. He was part of the work of the California Endowment. He was a member of the President's Youth Council, and he was a young man who had some gang activity in his earlier life, but got himself together and got himself out of that life, was emerging as a leader. He says this, he held himself to a higher standard because he learned his history. He said, free our dreams. And this is a program, is about equal opportunity. It means having a good job. It means not being afraid to walk out of my house and get gunned down. You can say what you want, wear what you want, and nobody's going to judge you because they're going to talk to me to find out what's in my head. It's a beautiful aspiration. And unfortunately, Brandon, his life was taken 3 years ago in Stockton by someone who he got into apparently just a simple disagreement with. Didn't have to do with any gang behavior, it was at a party. But we miss Brandon, and we know that our young people are really working hard to teach themselves with the help of elders to find their own medicine, to find their own sacredness, to find their own way through this life, to see what is their mission and what can they offer. Let's go to the next slide, please. The last couple of slides before we take a short break in this is, Carter G. Woodson, who's the originator of Negro, what's now African American History Month, Negro History Week, when he started it back in 1916. He wrote a very important book called The Miseducation of the Negro. He himself was an educator, taught at Howard University after being trained at Harvard and other schools, brilliant educator, worked in the Philippines, worked in a couple of places here in the US, but he says that about our education, the so-called modern education, with all its defects, however, does others so much more good than it does the Negro, because it's been worked out in conformity to the needs of those who have enslaved and oppressed weaker peoples. So he's challenging us around our education. He's challenging us at this moment where the country is having what I think to be is a false debate about critical race theory. Critical race theory is fundamentally about teaching the accurate history of the country without any varnish, without any feeling about it. And this notion that somehow white kids will feel bad if they learn the right history is so interesting to me, because Black and brown children have not heard their history and they feel bad about not hearing it. If Brandon Harrison were here to say it, he'd say, I feel bad about not learning what I need to know about the history of my people from the Nile Valley to the Mississippi Valley. Throughout that whole history, my history of my first encounters with my Native brothers and sisters, my history of how we dealt with queer folks and how we thought about, two-spirited people. Like all of that is part of the history, the miseducation of our past that Carter G. Woodson was dealing with back in the 20s and 30s. We go to the next slide, please. So we're gonna take a little break here. I want to invite you to take a deep breath, and I'm going to pass this back over to Papa Bear, I believe, for this bit of our exercise.
So that was a lot. That was a lot. And I don't know if y'all can see me. If I get a gallery view here, we can get, I'll probably get further back. We can stand up, and like Baba Greg, you can start to rub your hands. We're going to energize, all those images that we saw. We had to see them in the dark forest, and now we're going to, like he said, to lead us into the light so we can heal. A good example of what you go through almost every day, whether it be the classroom or your office or even at your home. So touch your head and your abdomen and breathe in and breathe out. I want you to let your hands hang down to the side. Hang to the side, that way you can hang. This comes from Carol Iron Rope Herrera. You're going to be shaking your hands like this. Breathe in. And we're going to do the 4 directions. And we're going to start with our mind. And we're going to count. You count silently in your head. So when you count, all of those things that you just saw, everything that's around you is just going to be concentrating on the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to start with our mind, our brain. So we're going to use our hands. You can feel them right now. They're getting a little fat, filling with blood. I want you to breathe in, touch your head, and wash your face, back of your neck. And you're going to inhale, exhale 4 times. Okay, back again, shaking your hands. Shake them as fast as you can. Feel that blood. Now what's connected to the brain and the head is the spinal cord, that electrical system that connects the computer to all the different parts of your body, because what's in your mind can manifest physically through these connections to the rest of your body. So you should be feeling about fat right now. Breathe in, reach the back of your neck, touch it. If you can go all the way back, those are flexible, and you come out where your belly button is and exhale 4 times. Count in your mind. The next section, the brain, electric system, the backbone, the spine, connected to all your organs. Your stomach, your large intestine, small intestine, your kidney, your spleen, all of those internal organs can manifest the pain, the oppression. You can eat too much, like me. Sometimes I'm depressed, I eat too much, or don't eat enough. Or you have stomach aches that manifest because of what's going on in your brain. Breathe in, reach back here on the side, cover all your internal organs under your ribs, and 4 times. Last time, last one, has to deal with love. Like Bubba Greg says, love a lot of times conquers all. Race, creed, color. When you fall in love, it doesn't matter. And because of love, we can be able to heal. So I'm going to touch your heart, breathe in. Breathe out 4 times. You may have to do that a few more times, you know. But I've used it sometimes. I'll go to a gathering and we have a discussion, and then I go back to my hotel room and I'm thinking, oh my God, did I insult somebody? Oh, well, no, he did give me a hug. We did shake hands. And you keep working that, and all of a sudden you're in this like anxious state, like that, those 4 young boys, and not knowing what to do and feeling helpless. And you do this exercise. Again, it came from Carol Iron Rope Herrera, who's a Lakota Sioux Medicine Society woman, an elder. So now I give that to you, and I say, Ashe Tamok Palabra. Thank you. Delicious.
We're going to take a quick break here for 5 minutes. We'll play a little video in the meantime. When we come back, we'll continue with the second part of Barbara Greg's presentation.
You wake up one morning with a dry, hacking cough, and you've lost your sense of smell. You visit your doctor for a diagnosis. With an X-ray and nasal swab, she diagnoses COVID. The coronavirus infected your body, and your lungs and nerves are now inflamed.
The inflammation sends you to hospital, and when you're in the ICU, you look around and notice a disproportionate number of people of color. In the United States, hospitalization and death rates for people of color are far higher than for white people. You make another kind of diagnosis yourself. This, you observe, is the outcome of structural racism. But how did those structures come to be?
To understand that, we must go back 600 years to a time when a different pestilence spread across the globe, one that continues today and which still makes us sick. And it makes us sick in a patterned way, through inflammatory disease, which underlies all the leading causes of death in industrialized places.
European colonization transformed the planet. Through slavery, genocide, and disease, colonists brought with them a cosmology that changed how people relate to each other and to the living world around them. Those who resisted were set to the flame.
This history lives inside you, whether you know it or not. Since you were conceived, your body has been exposed to the consequences of a world on fire.
The COVID hospital ward and the specific patients who are in its beds look that way because of centuries of attempts to extinguish other kinds of knowledge and civilizations.
If we understand disease with this new kind of diagnosis, the treatment options become radically different. The deep medicine we prescribe to address the inflammation of people and planet has been prescribed by others before us.
Rudolf von Virchow and Sitting Bull and Frantz Fanon.
Huda Sha'arwi and B.R. Ambedkar and Harriet Tubman.
They understood that our modern ills can't simply be vaccinated away.
We need a world rebuilt with care at its heart.
But what does that look like? Many indigenous communities have resisted colonialism by continuing to care for the living world around them. Their care for life protects them inside and out.
Indigenous communities defend the greatest range of biodiversity on the planet and, as a result, host the most diverse microbiota inside their bodies. These microbes confer protection against inflammatory disease.
When culture isn't capitalist and isn't colonized, it can soothe the inflammatory diseases that afflict us and fuel the burning of our planet.
Deep medicine offers new and old stories that connect humans to the teeming microbes in our guts and to the teeming stars in the skies. We offer a glimpse into cosmologies that bring a cooling balm
to a world, to societies, and to bodies that are inflamed.
We'll give everybody a moment to come back and welcome you back to the next part of this presentation.
We'll go ahead and return at 10:05. Some people out.
I'm sorry, Emma, what'd you say?
We'll return at 10:05. Some people just take a bio break, grab a snack.
Perfect.
Breathe a little more if they need to. Ari said, how about the maternal infant death rates for Black and Native people? I think they touched on that in there.
You wake up one morning with a dry.
Did you want to say something about that, Ari?
No, I didn't. I just noticed just make an emphasis of the same thing, the same statistics.
Rich man's war. Industrial streets. Class lines, money talks. Turning language to paper pieces. Rich man's war. Free man society. raging violent insecurity. Nuclear man, nuclear woman, unclear how to act. Rich man's war. Pershings cruising Europe. America, Russia. Governmental nuclear views. Industrial allies cutting the world as though they cannot see blood flowing. Rich man's war. Central America bleeding, wounds same as Palestine and Harlem. 3 Mile Island in El Salvador, Pine Ridge in Belfast. Rich man's war. The poor, starving for food, starving for land, starving for peace, starving for real. Rich man's war. Attacking human, attacking being, attacking earth, attacking tomorrow. Rich man's war. Thinking of always war. Thinking of always war. With machines for ancestors. New unborn generations. Chemical umbilical cords are only wiring. In your electrical progress, human lives burnt offerings to the god greed. With lies for ancestors, there is no truth in some futures. Rulers of minds feeding next generation souls to the control machine. Sacrifice ritual for the proper technology. With isolation for ancestors, there's only the present, bought by the credit material users. Forging chains binding you to destruction. Compliments of your deities, the industrial priest.
It's 10:06. If everyone wants to head back, we'll continue.
So as we're coming back, I want to thank you for hanging in there with us through some really difficult conversation and difficult presentation. But as we move this, I'm bring you back to those early questions. You know, who am I? Where do I come from? Why am I here? What is my mission? What is my medicine? And despite the oppression, despite white supremacy, despite the attempt to dehumanize us as people of color, it didn't work. And why didn't it work? I mean, we're struggling through it, but it didn't work. And because we're still here and we are resilient, we are here. And what I want to focus on for this next few minutes, and by the way, if you have any questions, comments, if you want to put them in the chat, we'll try to address those. And we're going to give some time toward the end of this to have some small group discussion. But I want to review what I believe are sort of some of the core healing practices of African descent people. And these will be familiar to you in some ways, maybe you're new to others, but these fundamental practices go across a lot of cultures and people express them differently, but we'll see a bit of, you know, what we mean by these this notion of essential core healing practices or medicine. So we go to the next slide. One of the people in our history and our collective history who did amazing work was Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, we know a little bit about her, most of us through our understanding of the Underground Railroad, what she did as a person who freed herself and then freed other people. One of her very first trips back after she had freed herself from chattel slavery was to go back for her family. And it's a really interesting story about Harriet Tubman because she went back for her husband who had given up on her. So you imagine this, all you in a relationship and you're on this plantation, you free yourself, you come back for your spouse, you come back for your novia, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whoever you care about, and maybe your children, only to find out that he is taken up with another woman. So you're talking about, like, I'm sure Harriet Tubman was real pissed off. Like, just to put it in human terms, you know, she risked her life to come back for this man who had gotten together with somebody else and basically said, I don't want to leave. Like, you've risked your life. But it's said that Harriet Tubman went back down into these forced labor camps, so-called plantations, more than 19 times. There's a lot of dispute about how many people she actually brought into freedom. But the real point is that Harriet Tubman was a soldier. She was a spy in the Civil War in the Union Army. She freed people. After the war was over, she had to fight the federal government to get her pension. She had a bounty on her head during all those years that she had been moving through the South, mostly in Maryland. She was a river person. And so those even in San Antonio, you have a river that runs through the city. Harriet Tubman grew up and learned from the river boatmen and women, the ways of the rivers and the streams. And so part of the storyline is that she would bring people off these plantations sometimes, and there was all these songs that were coded to say Harriet Tubman's on the way. There were quilts. The art of quilt making, Harriet Tubman and that generation put messages in the quilts, and they would hang those quilts out to dry, and that would be the signal to people to get ready. You know, Harriet's coming. If you were so lucky, right? But one of the things that I want to identify about Harriet Tubman is that this idea of a core medicine, a core healing practice is prayer and glorifying, having a belief in something bigger than yourself. The image that's flashing on the left-hand side of the screen with people holding their hands up, that's the sign of the Ka. I referenced it earlier in the presentation that the Ka was the spirit, and that the writing, when you write the word Ka, you use this symbol of people with their hands up to signify that this is a acknowledgement of spirit. This is a honoring, a glorifying of something greater than yourself. So all the way back to the Nile Valley, coming forward to the experience of African Americans in this country. If you grew up like I did in a Black church, what you saw was when people got, quote, the Holy Ghost, when people were going into trance, that often you would see people putting their hands up. And that was a way of sort of acknowledging spirit. So just look for those physical signs, like in ceremony, in dance, in the ways that people pray. And that Harriet Tubman was just an amazing person, and she would pray. She would say, God, make me strong and give me the energy and ability to fight. There's a story that's told about Harriet Tubman where Harriet Tubman, when she was still enslaved, was being beaten on a regular basis by some so-called owner, some so-called master. And it is said that Harriet Tubman prayed hard. And it was a two-pronged prayer. She prayed that this man would stop beating her. And then she prayed that if he doesn't stop beating me, that he would die. And the story is told that this man kept beating her, she kept praying. And then when he died, she felt bad. Like, she felt, oh my God, like I caused this human being to die from my word, from my prayer. There's so many stories about Harriet Tubman's life. And she lived, amazingly, Harriet Tubman lived to be an older woman, died in her bed at home in Albany, New York. She had established a home for formerly enslaved folks. So even though she didn't have a lot of money, she would welcome people to that home and live there. So Harriet Tubman's strength was a spiritual strength. We go to the next slide. She really is emblematic of that first idea about prayer and glorifying, and that no matter what was going on in her life, Harriet Tubman was constantly sharing her medicine with other people. We go to the next slide. The one thing I wanted to say too about our collective history is that many of us growing up, when we had history classes in elementary school or high school, and we learned whatever we learned about the Underground Railroad was that somehow it was always going from south to north. But there is a lot of information that says that the Underground Railroad also ran from the southern part of the US into Mexico, into Florida, into the Caribbean. And it makes sense, because if you grew up like I did in Arkansas, in the southeast part of the country, or south, sort of mid-south part of the country, if you had to think about, can I get to Canada, or can I get to the border in Mexico? Can I get to San Antonio, El Paso? Can I get down into that part of the country? What's the best choice to make, right? And obviously it's a shorter distance to get into Texas and Mexico. I'm fascinated by the history that you all are grappling with around the Alamo, around the fundamental reasons that the Mexican army was coming into Texas, was to say to Houston, Sam Houston, and the others who had been allowed to be in Texas on one condition, that they would not bring the practice of slavery into Texas. And after a few years, they did that, and the Mexican government wasn't happy about it. So all of that mythology around the Alamo was really Davy Crockett and all these folks were fighting to preserve the ability of Sam Houston and the Texans to keep slavery. That is a huge part of that story that most Americans don't know. So there's all of this history, all of what's going on around the lunch counter and the controversy around whether or not to keep the Woolworth's lunch counter as part of that history of Alamo Plaza. I just encourage you all to keep telling the real story, keep telling the real history, keep saying like how are our histories intertwined, and that understanding of our history is actually part of our medicine. We can go to the next slide, please.
Really quickly, Baba Greg, there's a question in the chat.
Sure.
From
we still work in Arkansas. You ever do still work
Emma, you're kind of muffled. We can barely hear you. I'm gonna go to the chat and look at it. I used to live in Little Rock near Pine Bluff. Okay, worked at the Women's Project, right on at KAFB. Do I still have Arkansas twang? That is funny to me. Do you ever do this work back in Arkansas? Yes, I've had a chance to do some work in Arkansas. And so here's the thing. If I start talking like this right here, and I know that I'm from, like if I go down to Pine Bluff and hang out for more than a couple of days, then that twangy thing kind of comes back, right? And but I live in California, and I think part of what happened to me, and thanks for the question. Part of what happened to me is like as a little kid, my mom went to graduate school in Lincoln, Nebraska when I was in the 2nd grade, and I think whatever twang I had kind of flattened out in that Midwest kind of way, and so I can kind of code switch. I can go back and forth, and it's like another language for some of us and some of you will understand this. If I say I'm finna go over here to the store, what does that mean, right? Finna is fixing to is I'm getting ready to go to the store. So that's the kind of language that we had in Arkansas when I was growing up. And I really appreciate the question. Glad that you were able to actually work at Arkansas. And thank you again for that, Ari. That was a great question. Thank you. And it gives me a chance to act out a little bit. All right. The second part of this core healing practices is libations and incense. The little short libation I did this morning to honor our ancestors, the invitation to you to, I love that, Ari, act out. The invitation to you to smudge, to use incense. The invitation to acknowledge those people who came before you is an ancient practice. In the Nile Valley, they wrote it down. They said, pour libation for your mother and father who rest in the valley of the West. Do this even when you are away from home. God will witness your actions and accept them. Do this for your parents, and your children will do it for you. Now, they wrote that 3,000 years ago in their text. This image that you see is actually, you get a visual of someone pouring a libation. So you see the image on the left-hand side. He's got two things in his hands. One is a vessel where he's pouring a libation. He's pouring an offering at a altar in front of this image of a deity, right? And the second thing is an incense bowl. So he's burning incense. It could be churai, it could be copal, it could be frankincense. Is that medicine that you see when Papa Bear comes and smudges people up, when he does that work, and other folks in your community, those are ancient traditions. And again, in this question of first encounters, I always wonder, what were the gifts that people gave to each other? Did they share copal? Did they share frankincense? Did they share myrrh? Did they share, like in the Christian story of Christmas, the wise men brought frankincense and myrrh? People have always used it as gifts. I'm wearing a beautiful gift, a lion tooth that Papa Bear gave me, and it's a precious thing that I have in my household that belonged to his father. So how many times in those first encounters did we share something? And it built on these relationships, the kind of relationship that I'm blessed to have with Baba Isaac Cardenas. This is part of our tradition, is sharing that libation, sharing that incense, breaking bread together, mixing medicine, as it were. And let's go to the next slide. Thank you. A third core element, singing and dancing together. Something that we don't do as much as we used to. But when I grew up, we sang together in church. We sang together in clubs. You know, when you come to ceremony, you get to sing together, you get to dance together. And often we don't have, as African Americans, we don't have the consistent body of music that we share sometimes. It's a generational thing. If you go back, there was a generation where people knew collectively a lot of songs, and they were fundamentally songs that you sang in church. In other communities, those songs are being, shared without necessarily any break in the history. For African descent people, because we were forced into English, often we lost our songs. But if you go to Brazil, people socialize, they go to the beach and they sing together. They bring their guitars, they bring their flutes, and they're listening to hip hop. They're listening to, more modern versions of salsa and samba, and, people are listening to music. But this idea of the transformative power of singing together, of moving together, of being able to do things has a long history. And then the more you look at our respective stories, the more you learn about the power of that music. Let's go to the next slide. There was also this tradition of restorative circles that goes all the way back, to ancient times. In this example, it's really interesting to me that this is a practice in some communities, that when somebody did something wrong, they would take that person to the center of the village, surround them for 2 days with all of the people from the community. And it wasn't a chastisement. It wasn't people telling you how bad you were, how much you screwed up, why you did this or that. It was to say all of the good things about you. So just imagine if sometime in your life where you made a mistake, and instead of being chastised, people said, we're going to remind you of all the great things that are about you, how kind you can be, how wonderful and giving you can be, how you care about your mom and your dad and your brothers and your sisters, that they just found all of the best things to say about you. And you think about what that would do to reinforce the goodness in you, your humanity. But that notion of restorative circles, I think that we have a lot of things passing for restorative justice circles. Anytime you bring anything to the West, to the US, it generally is going to get corrupted a bit. We know that some of the history of restorative justice circles comes to us from the Maori people in New Zealand, and that talking sticks are part of that. When you bless up a talking stick as an item, I was appalled a few years ago when I went to an event that it was held out as a restorative justice circle where somebody in the neighborhood had been killed, and the person running the circle used a 99-cent store spatula that still had the tag on it and called it a talking piece. I was stunned. I was like, you could have put a little bit more thought into this. You went to your car and found whatever was in your trunk and used it as a talking piece. I guess if, necessity is the mother of invention, they say, but you could have done a little bit better than a plastic 99-cent store spatula, right? To make the point that many of our cultural practices get bastardized. They get corrupted if we don't know the origins, if we don't know the history of what that work is about. Let me go to the next slide. So I want to go back and forth a little bit around this notion of speech and the idea of word and power. In ancient Nile Valley, there was a very rich language, and this word shekem means to be strong, to strengthen oneself, to prevail over something, to gain mastery. And it goes to this question of like, who am I? Where do I come from? Why am I here? We're here to strengthen ourselves. Go to the next slide. We're here to use our words, to use our power, to use our prayer, to use our songs, to inform spirit. This word sicker, and I'm gonna give you an example of like the cultural unity across Africa and into the US with these last few slides before we just open this up. But there's this idea of, from the Nile Valley from 3,000 years ago, this idea of to inform. So when you see this image, the way that the ancient Egyptians, the people of Kemet would write is they had a quote alphabet. And it's kind of weird to say alphabet because alphabet is a Greco-Roman term, from the alpha, beta, sigma, and gamma, et cetera. But the letters that we use in the English language and in Spanish their roots are in this community. So the symbol you see that looks like a folded piece of cloth is the sound for S. The placenta that is that circle that has a line through it has the KH sound. The circular shape that looks like a mouth is the sound for R. So it's sicker. And then every time you see this language, when you see a picture, like the picture of the person holding their hand to their mouth, that picture is called a determinative. It's like an adjective in English. It modifies the word. So it helps you understand what the word is. So in that society, if you were literate, you understood the full text. If you weren't a literate person, you might get meaning simply from the hieroglyph, simply from the Medu Neter. They called it the Medu Neter, the speech of the gods is the energy. And so this idea to inform, seker or second, goes to prayer, goes to singing, goes to praising. So if you can see that cultural connection between, and in a moment, go to the next slide, we'll talk about like how these words go through the course of history. In a similar fashion, there's something called zik or zikr, right? And this idea is in our Muslim community, and this is, we're gonna show you a short clip. It comes up, Ramon, if it hadn't already been preset, at 30 minutes and 12 seconds into this video. But this is an example of zik or zikr from current day West Africa. And there's some similarities between that word seker and sick. It's the same idea. So it's just a small example of this call and response style of music. It is this notion of a devotional act in short phrases and prayers that's repeated over and over. It's like a meditation. And this is a group of men in West Africa following with their imam who is leading the song, and they're responding to it. So several years, we can go to the next slide. So several years ago, I had a chance to be in Senegal. And I was in a household that was a Muslim household. I'm not Muslim, but I appreciate everybody's tradition. I try to learn from tradition as much as I can. And one of the things that happened when I was there on a Friday night, because every community has a mosque. And in that mosque, there's generally a loudspeaker when they call people to pray 5 times a day, once before sunrise. All throughout the course of the day, middle of the day, people will stop work, school, et cetera, to pray. And you sort of think about like the impact that might have on a community if like 5 times a day, you're collectively praying. And somebody said this to me, half jokingly, half seriously. They said, well, if you're praying and you're either getting ready to go pray or you just prayed, it's hard to be in conflict with people because either you just got through praying or you're about to go pray. And it's like, you don't have time to be pissed off. You don't have time to be in an argument. The other thing that we know is true about, there's a physical aspect of that prayer. They wash their hands all the way up to the elbow. They wash their ears because the symbolism is like so that you can hear God better. They wash their mouth so they can speak truth. That idea that Maulana Karinga says to speak truth, that idea of ma'at. They wash their nose, and it has both health benefit and it has spiritual benefit to it, right? So one Friday night during the evening prayers, I'm hearing people singing in the broader community. You can hear this music moving around the same way that when people watch soccer games together or football games together around the world, when there's a goal that's scored, you hear a cheer go up all over the community. It's a collective energy, right? So I was hearing this singing, and having grown up in a Southern Baptist church in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, it sounded familiar to me. Now, this is in West Africa in the 1990s, and this is removed from, in terms of the direct connection between West Africa and where I grew up, but I'm hearing something that sounded very familiar. And I asked somebody, I said, what is this? They said, that's Zik or Zicker. We're gonna play this next piece, Ramon. It's at 8 minutes and 18 seconds. This is from a church service in the South. I can't quite remember where it was, but somewhere I think in Alabama. And we used to call this type of singing Dr. Watts long metered hymns. And this is something I grew up with, but didn't know what it was. So if we can play about a minute of this so you can get another sense. And again, you just saw West Africa. Now we're gonna see the southern part of the US and how people were singing these praise songs and still do to this day. So it gives you some sense of that style of music, right? It's a call and response, just like we saw with the folks in Senegal. It is a song that's being sung communally. And as a kid, as a young person in Pablo, Arkansas, at the Highland Missionary Baptist Church, I could not tell what they were saying. I didn't understand the words. I didn't understand exactly, what was going on. But as an adult, I now appreciate what that old tradition was doing. It was connecting the old way of worship and praise to something newer. And I remember hearing it because it would be like, I called the Lord and he heard my cry. And naturally the whole congregation go, I called the Lord and he heard my cry. It was powerful. It was powerful. I didn't understand it at the time, but I learned it enough to appreciate it. So when I get to West Africa and I hear it, then I'm like, okay. And so again, this idea that somehow African descent people lost our culture. No, we transformed our culture. We innovated on our culture. You can go to the next slide. We changed things up a bit. And we can go to the next slide. We can go past this one. Okay, here's another example of this. Now, this is from South Carolina. This is the Gullah people who held on to many of what's called African survivals in the New World. And this idea of the ring shout, where people were moving around in a space together. They were improvising the sound of drums, because in the US, unlike Brazil and a few other places, the drum was taken away. And the drum was taken away for a very specific reason, because the drum was used to communicate. The drum was used to heal. The drum was used to be a connection between the living world and the world of the ancestors, right? So in the ring shout, that's right, Deanna, drum language. In ring shout is also a word from the Arabic tradition, Arabic word from that Muslim tradition, shout, right? And so we're gonna play, this is from the McIntosh County Shouters. If we can go to 8 minutes and 18 seconds, I think you're at the right place. I think you got it. We're gonna play a little bit of this, and so you can hear how that part of the healing tradition has been preserved. So this example, and thank you for that. This example, we just stick to that slide for just a second. You see, as someone said, the language of dance, the language of shout, the improvising using a stick. If that's all you got, use a stick. If you don't have a drum, use a stick, right? If you don't have a stick, you use your hands. If you can't do your hands, you clap your feet. That idea of holding on to the rhythms, holding on to the song, holding on to the spirit is part of that healing tradition. The same thing is true in Brazil and the quilombos, where the candomblé tradition, where people ran away to the hills. Quilombo is a maroon community. It's hundreds of them all over Brazil. The most famous was Palmares, where Zumbi, as a leader in the 1700s, 1800s, took people into the mountains, created their own societies. You could be white, you could be black, as long as you wanted to be free, you would come into these communities. And much of this tradition is preserved in the Quilombo tradition in Palmares. Something I learned about Quilombos was that the Portuguese were different than the English. They kind of let people, they were still brutal, but there were some Quilombos that were just outside of town, and that people would leave on the weekends, go off to the Quilombos, do the work that they were doing, knew they would finish on the Monday, but it kind of reminds me of what we do on the weekends. Sometimes you leave work on Friday, you put on your cultural clothes, you do your work, you do your thing, and then Monday morning, you got to get back at the plantation. And so the Quilombo say, Gary, you feeling that? Like, this is something about this history, this culture, that there's some humor in it too, that we do things to keep ourselves enlivened, to keep ourselves healthy. Let's go to the next slide. We got a couple more and then we'll move on. And so this notion of relationship, of these core healing practices, of being in community, of the relationship that Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali had. And we're grieving that one of Malcolm's daughters died this past week. But that family has contributed so much to our understanding of who we are as a people. We can go to the next slide, please. People like Frederick Douglass. Some of you, if you watch TV, a lot of us have been watching a lot more TV during the COVID pandemic. And there's a program on Showtime called The Good Lord Bird. And it's Ethan Hawke and Daveed Diggs. Ethan Hawke is playing John Brown. Daveed Diggs is playing the role of Frederick Douglass. It's a great piece on the armed resistance against slavery starting in Kansas and then the raid on Harper's Ferry. Frederick Douglass was a powerful orator, freed himself from chattel slavery, became one of the most photographed people of his time. There are a lot of images of Frederick Douglass because he knew that the narrative around telling stories. And one of the things that he says in the dialogue in that film is that he never smiled in any photograph because he didn't want to reinforce this idea that that Europeans have around Black people we were happy on the plantation. He was like, no, he's like, I'm not happy. He's like, so he leaves all these images for us to remind us of his generation's work to be free and to heal themselves. You go to the next slide, please. We know Madiba, Nelson Mandela. Sometimes you hear this term Ubuntu, this notion that I am because we are because I am. And Nelson Mandela talked about that in terms of the medicine, if you will, of travelers on the continent, that, before you had hotels, before you had this sort of industry, people would travel and they would stay in the homes of other people. And there was this understanding that if you were a traveler, that you would be treated with hospitality, with food, with water, with a place to lay your head, because when other people were traveling, that was expected. It was that reciprocity that we talk about in that idea of ma'at. That happened to me on a trip to Senegal in that same household I mentioned before, that they wouldn't, for the whole week I was with them, they wouldn't let me buy anything. I would go to the market with some of the younger kids and I would pick up a mango or something in the market. And they was like, no, you can't pay for this. We have to pay for this, because their idea of hospitality was that whatever your wants and needs were in that moment, they should be given to you. And even the kids said, no, you don't understand. My dad is going to be upset with me if he hears that I let you buy something in the market. And so just like generational trauma is passed, generational hospitality, what we in the South used to call Southern hospitality, is fundamentally African hospitality. We go to the next slide. Ella Baker was another one of our teachers who taught us. She said, give people light and they'll find their own way. Ella Baker was someone who took care of her sister's daughter when she was orphaned by her mom. Ella Baker was a founding adult advisor to SNCC and the young people in that movement. And what I appreciate about Ella Baker was that even as an elder, she said to younger people, you all have to find your own way. I will help you organize, but those old heads are going to keep you too conservative. She sort of said, you know, if you get down with NAACP and SCLC, it will never get free. And so Ella Baker and people in the Black Panther Party that originated proudly here in Oakland, that generation was supporting younger people in their growth and development so that liberation could be achieved in their lifetime. Let's go to the next slide. Just like Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, we go to the next slide. You know, all of our relations, our Latinx brothers and sisters who are in the fields working with Filipinos and others, the songs. My understanding of the labor movement and the workers, you know, migrant farm worker movement was that songs and culture were also part of that movement. Cesar Chavez, as I understand it, was a very spiritual man. He fasted, he did hunger fasts, hunger strikes, he prayed, he believed in the same medicine. Next slide, please. And he said, once social change begins, you can't reverse it. You can't uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress people who are not afraid anymore. And that's what we're moving toward, is to get out of our fear, to get out of our self-imposed limitations about what it means to be free, what it means to use our medicine. We go to the next slide, please. And that there was a conversation that happened between Chavez and Dr. King. There's a conversation that happens between Dolores Huerta and people like Betty Shabazz. That every generation, the same way we're doing today, makes an effort to mix medicine. You go to the next slide. Makes an effort to build together, makes an effort to organize ourselves, makes an effort to leave artifacts so that the next generation will have a path, will have a way to go. I'm going to pause here. If we have any questions, comments, we can take a look at the chat. I know that we're going to move into a small group breakouts here in a moment. I'm going to turn that over to Emma in just a second. But let me just open it up. Any comments, questions, observations about anything we've shared so far?
Yeah, I think the only comment I have, let me turn this back on. After discussing everything we discussed, it seems like human trafficking has been around forever. You know, it's such a huge, topic nowadays. With just, San Antonio's really huge, huge on human trafficking. We're one of the biggest ones in the state, as far as statistic wise. You see it all over TV now. Now that everybody has phones, it's being recorded on cameras in stores and cameras on telephone poles. Where people are snagging people out of people's hands and out of picking up the whole stroller and running off, and people running by motorcycles and grabbing a kid. I mean, yeah, it's I never really looked at it that way as far as like the slavery thing, but it's like human trafficking. It's been around since the beginning of time. I mean, even with the biblical times.
Yeah.
And I understand how that trauma can be carried on from generation to generation.
Yeah.
Because think about it, when they let everybody go, when they let all of the slavery people go, nobody received any type of treatment. Nobody received any type of trauma treatment. Nobody understood how to change that trauma instead of transferring it to what we do now, which is, transforming it into something more bigger, better, beautiful. So yeah, I think the work we do is very, very vital.
Yeah, Sam, thank you for that observation. Because you're right. I mean, that trafficking happened, and the best that we did was to try to heal ourselves. I mean, one of the number one things that people did when the Civil War ended was they tried to find their families. Like people would run ads in newspapers saying, have you seen Greg? He's 6'4", he's, he was last seen on the so-and-so plantation in Mississippi. Like it was huge. August Wilson, who was a great African-American playwright, wrote a play called Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And it centers on that whole idea that post-Civil War, people were really trying to create family, and that medicine of being in a relationship and finding family was super important. My fourth child, Imani, works for an organization here in Oakland called Missy, and Missy focuses on sexually exploited minors. And so some of the stories that I hear her telling when she comes home at night about what's happening to young people, boys and girls, in this community who have been trafficked is it's horrendous. And so we have so much work to do on that front to reclaim our children, to make sure that they get the help they need so they don't pass on this trauma to other people in their lineage. Louisiana has a question or comment, but please go ahead and welcome.
Hi, thank you, Gregory Hodge. So I just wanted to share something in my experience. I've since gone through a process of decolonizing my education and connecting to my ancestral roots. But I do want to say, growing up as a Mexican American in a predominantly Black community, I feel like I was brought up and raised by Black women and Black community, and I witnessed or experienced their just a way of holding folks, especially the children, when we were just at the park or in the classroom, and I feel like for a huge part of the reason why I feel like maybe I kept it together, or maybe didn't stray too much, or when I was out there acting out, right, there was always those teachings and those reminders by elders, like, hey, how's it going, or giving me some consejo or advice. And I just want to say that it's so beautiful to see how that spiritualism, right, that love still transcends those generations. It's still part of their communities. And even with all the wrongs going on and the dysfunctions that we sometimes bring on ourselves, and that sometimes exist, that is still there. So thank you for giving us that whole overview of history and reminding me of that.
Sure. No, thank you for your comment too, Luciana. You remind me of one of my maestros, Jerry Teo, who Jerry always tells a story. He grew up in Compton. And so he always tells a story about, like, it's sort of like, tortillas and collard greens. So like his grandmother making tortillas and his Black friends coming over to her house and eating these fresh tortillas. He's like, there's nothing better in the world. He's always talking about it. I was like, well, you never invite me to your house and give me no tortillas. Like, don't be telling me about that. Like, but we laugh about it. But he says that he went to Ms. Williams' house and she was like, okay, little Jerry, sit down. We're going to have collard greens and we're having some fried chicken today or whatever. But it's a very similar story. And he laughs about it because he said, yeah, I'm straight out of Compton, but he's very clear that he grew up in a very rich cultural community, that his own family who prayed him up every day, and then his African-American family who also, took care of him. Those are the relationships we need to encourage. Those, because our kids all growing up together. I got Vietnamese kids in Oakland that sound Black, because they growing up around Black people, right? And you got Black kids that are learning Spanish because they're growing up around, the La Familia. So this is that moment where we need to do more and more and more of that work. Deanna, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, I appreciate the preface of history before going into like the similarities that go across the board as far as like medicines, and then like how medicines are similar. I think it's such an important thing to have, and like when people decide to like move into this work and like do this work, that like the methods, right? Like we talk about mixing of medicines, and like people misappropriating other people's medicines and wanting to take the medicines or the methods and use them and discard the people that they come from. And so I think it's really important to make sure that like those histories are shared, and those stories are told, so that people can not only like show respect from where they come from, they can also acknowledge the people and the histories from which they come.
And Jana, thank you so much. We're going to move to breakouts. Anna has, if you got a quick question, we'll take this last question or comment, and then we're going to move to breakouts. I'll turn it over to Emma. Go ahead, Anna.
Thank you. It's just more a comment and thanking you. I didn't go to school quite much. If my clothes wasn't smelling or I didn't have shoes that fit my feet, I just didn't go to school growing up. I'm from Saginaw, Michigan, a couple of hours from Detroit. And so I grew up around a predominantly African-American community. In school, there was like 3 other Mexicans. There was my sister, and my cousin. So it was just my surroundings and circumstances. Then my education comes from Bexar County Jail when I got my GED while I was there. So I did have no education on slavery outside of society, and using my common sense and making sure like I'm not being ignorant. But this today alone has helped me. My kids challenge the things that they're being taught every day in school. And I have 6 children, 4 of them are boys. And my daughter on a daily basis is having to make sure that she doesn't react in a way that the history teacher will say, see, you're acting like a little Mexican girl from the west side of San Antonio, Texas, you know? And so there shouldn't be no space for history teachers in the west side of San Antonio if that's their ideology, to challenge a 16-year-old who knows in her heart and in her prayer that what she's learning in school every day, it's not okay. And so thank you. This is very informative. And this is something I'll be sharing with my family when we get home, when they ask me, as soon as I hit the door, hey, Mom, how was your day at work today? Because they actually have really good days knowing that I'm here working, but being able to heal. And when you say, what's our mission? What's our purpose? And so I'd be able to carry that and establish that with my children. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
And thank you, Moni, for this opportunity too.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna pass it over to Emma. She'll get us started with some breakouts, and then we'll come back in a little bit.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Papa Greg. Thank you guys for your discussion. There'll be a bit more time after this breakout session for additional shares and questions. But we're gonna go ahead and head to that link that Sid just dropped in the chat, or you can use a QR code if it's easier to do from your phone. We're going to break out in pairs. You guys can discuss amongst each other, reflect on the questions. Baba Greg has shared with us who we are, where we're from. Discuss amongst yourselves. We use the Post-its to add to the slides. There's 3 other slides in addition to the instructions, and feel free to add your sticky notes, answer the questions, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. And we can move to Frank, Moni, if you guys want to move to the rooms too, so we can have a little additional people.
For the discussion, like what's going on?
Yes.
All right. So that's why I didn't know if you wanted me to stay neutral or go in.
I think Sam's in a room by himself, so if you can head to room 4 with him.
But who's facilitating that room?
It's discussion amongst each other.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, but he's in there by himself?
Yes. Yeah, oh, there's Rose. Okay, she joined him. But yeah, we'll just we'll let you join them. You can just get in on the discussion.
And they're adding on the Jamboard, right? Or do they have to be explained, the Jamboard?
No, I just explained it.
Okay. So can you send me on there again?
Yeah, I just tried to, you should have an invite. It's saying not joined.
Okay, here it is. I looked
Okay.
at the breakout.
Where's everybody? Uh-oh. Still in the breakout rooms? Oh, they're gonna close in 30 seconds. Welcome back, everybody. We have everybody back in. Very much. So we'll take a few more minutes to share out a few questions, or if anybody wants to share like what they, anything on their heart specifically that they want to share with the rest of the group that you got out of your discussions with one another. Thank you guys for participating again in this part of the exercise, because I think it's really important that we reflect and apply these things to ourselves, and especially the last piece. So thank you guys. If anybody wants to come off mute, you're welcome to do so.
Can I say something? No. So first of all, I think I just want to say thank you again. I think that Baba Hodge, Papa Bear, thank you for and then all AIT, thank you for holding the space. Because I think even for me, it's important. I think Papa Bear said it's important that we reflect on these questions at all times, especially in those tough moments, right? Especially in those dark moments when we go into a meeting and we come out like, I just feel a certain way. So I think for me, these are teachings that have been brought, that I've been blessed with before, but I think again, just a reminder and the constant reminder of this is what we got to go back to, because these are some of the basics, right? But I think sometimes we think that we got the basics already down and then we'll go on to the next one. But it's almost like, no. I think Michael Jordan, I'm a big Michael Jordan fan. The fundamentals, you got to focus on the fundamentals. And these are the fundamentals right here, right? Who am I? Where do we come from, and why am I here? And I think I appreciate my brother Juan Gomez, because my brother Juan Gomez has always said, what got me here is not going to get me to the next level. I want to get to the next level. And I think to get to the next level, I'm going to have to challenge myself and look at that mirror every day. So thank you again to all of you all for putting this together, and for the reminder that we all have work to do and that this continues to work. So thank you all for the space. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope.
Awesome. Let's have someone share on where did I come from? Anybody who responded in this area, if you'd like to share out real quick.
So I wasn't able to put the sticky note, but where do I come from? I think generations and generations of trauma and neglect and abuse and lack of parenting or nurturing limits me to I'm from my mom. Literally, that's all I know. And my mom was a farm worker. She's a cotton picker in South Texas, around the Valley area. And Sebastian, our family actually owns a cotton field still here in Texas. Then she also is a migrant worker. She migrated to Michigan to pick strawberries, and the men followed the GMC company. And so as soon as the GMC left Saginaw, Michigan, we migrated back down to San Antonio, Texas.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take one more. Thank you guys for sharing your stories. It's really important. We'll continue doing that.
I guess I'll share real quick. I'm a raging Cajun. I was actually born in New Orleans, Louisiana. So even and I know there's a lot of French there, and different other types of
Nolans.
I didn't stay there long because my dad was military. So my twin sister, and my older brother were born there in 1962, 63. I think I left when I was like 6 months old. I'd never been back. I'd love to go back, but I have a lot of brothers and sisters. There's 9 of us, and there's 2 of my brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, both of them are deceased now. My older sister Cynthia, my brother who's a year older than me, who carried my father's name, Antonio Gomez. They were the Weddles of the family. I remember when people would see like family pictures of us, and people would say, "Hey man, who are those white people?" I said, "That's my brother and sister." I mean, and I know they're white as hell, but that's actually my blood brother and sister right there, man. And it always freaked me out, even to this day. When I show like an old photo on on Facebook or something, people say, "Hey, who's those white people?" So now it's my brother and sister, So I mean, from our ancestry, I know we got Spanish blood in us. We got Aztec blood. We probably, if I was to do my ancestry, it's probably, I don't know, probably be like 15 ethnicities. I'm pretty sure. So we come from a lot of places. When you look at where we actually come from, our ancestry, we look at how everybody, and what we're talking about, the slave trade, and in Brazil all the way up to Canada. I mean, we all got so many different bloods in us, and so we're really part of, and I think that's why it's important, when we talk about interconnectedness, being able to connect with everybody. This part of our curriculum where it says not until we're able to sing our songs in unison with one another, will then there be peace on the world and peace on earth, that we can accept each other for who we are and where we come from, and not, have some type of a standard or basis or to where how we judge people. I think if we can all stand within that non-judgmental zone, and I'm always telling the guys in my class, I think about it, when you put little kids into a class, I mean, like infants up to like 1 or 2 years old, they don't see color or anything. They just want to have fun with people, love the people around them. It's not until they get older when somebody teaches them those type of things. And that's an unfortunate thing. So we just need to start educating people to where, like I said, let's get down to the fundamentals of loving each other. Love thy neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Live by the golden rule. And then hopefully things will get better.
Thank you. Powerful stuff. Let's take one more from the "Why am I here?" slide. It's an important piece. We want to know why, what you feel your purpose is here. What is your sacred path in this world? We have some good shares on this slide here.
Okay, I'll speak up. Just like my brother Sam, I I feel like I have a sacred calling. First of all, to learn to humble myself and realize I'm not who I thought I wanted people to think I was, and to realize just who I am. And that's really just, I'm just a man. I'm just a normal man, and a man who has experienced traumas from childhood all the way into my adulthood, and to reach out to my brothers who are going through the same things and not being able to understand why we have done some of the things we've done, why we continue to do some of the things we do. And then also to try to teach my brothers that we can start healing, that we have to forgive ourselves, we have to heal ourselves so that we can be good to our children, to be good role models, and to teach our children, and to respect their mothers, to respect the women in our community, our sisters, our mothers, our cousins, our aunts. And that's my sacred purpose, is that we're called to, we really are called to be respectful to our women in our lives. And there's so much disrespect and just in the society that we have and the culture that we have, where we disrespect women so much, whether it's through music, through media, through just the ideology of looking at women as less. And I think that once we as men can start viewing women as equals, then, you know, then we the men are the ones who benefit from this. We're the ones who benefit from treating women equal. I tell the guys, I mean, our lives would be so much better and easier if we learn how to respect our women. So I think that's who I am, or why I'm here.
Hell yeah, Rudy. Hell yeah, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Baba Greg. We're gonna go ahead and pass the floor to Moni, Ramon, to go ahead and close us out for today.
Cool.
Hey, Moni, can I just say one more thing real quick, Moni?
Quickly.
Yeah. Mr. Hodge, I realize, now I know where I know you from. There's an old video that you and Jerry and a whole bunch of guys did called The Circle.
Oh yeah.
And you're in that video at the end, and you're in that circle, you know, drumming next to Jerry, you know, so now I remember.
I didn't have as much gray hair back then.
Yeah, exactly. The whole time I was thinking, like, I know this guy from somewhere, man. Then it popped into my head, like, he's from The Circle.
Yeah.
That was a great video, man. I shared that a lot with my class.
Thank you.
Yeah. Salinas, California.
Yes.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, so in closing, we just want to say thank you again so much to everybody who's joined in on us or with us on this call. Really appreciate your time and effort. Really super appreciative of our elders here. Baba Greg, thank you so much for the knowledge, wisdom, sharing, opportunity to connect with you and you know, bring this opportunity to a lot of the folks here in San Antonio. You know, we definitely want to continue this, as we shared before, in different ways. And so hopefully, you know, we'll continue to grow in this relationship together with our Uncle Papa Bear. You know, really big thank you again to connecting us with powerful people, you know, in a lot of different movements across the country, and for your strength and energy and ways of just teaching and being that elder for lots of people here in this South Texas region. And so really thankful and appreciative of you. And to, of course, the team, you know, all the team, Emma putting together a badass presentation, doing a lot of the legwork, background work, and making sure that this training here is a success. Sid, thank you for all your work and effort. Frank, thank you for all your work and efforts. And so super appreciative of, you know, everybody here. Feel free to utilize these resources. We want to share some of this information with you all. You can use the QR code here to connect to organizations like the National Compadres Network, another partner organization here locally, the Empower House. Shout out to Empower House. Some of the folks that are on the call here today, big shout out. Another opportunity as you're working in schools is a tool that we like to utilize as well, is a really great model for restorative practices, transformative justice, and inclusion work that Minneapolis Public Schools brings into their opportunities for student engagement and family engagement. And then, of course, check out our organization, American Indians in Texas, that's at the Spanish Colonial Missions, and any opportunities for potential trainings in the future or other ways to support what we're doing or connect with us as a partner. Some other resources that we want to share with you all is just some literature here. If you're interested in connecting more with that decolonial mentality, understanding some of the practices that are happening now around decolonizing, these are different tools and ways that you can utilize to help you in that process. So there's also social media resources here. We find that it's a really, really integral tool to incorporate that knowledge sharing and all of this skill building in the social space where most of our people around, this millennial, Gen X, Gen Z, whatever, movements, that are continuing on and on. These are the spaces where you're going to find a lot of people and a lot of younger people that we want to help share this information and knowledge with. And so feel free to reach out to these organizations as well. And then last but not least, if you could, please take some time, use the QR code here, or I think we're going to drop a link in the chat. If you can take this quick survey for us, just to kind of get a sense of, how this training was for you all, what you feel was useful, and what will help us identify better ways to navigate these trainings and what, our folks want to see, so feel free to take some time. We'll give folks about a minute or two to knock this out. Any closing words or thoughts, Baba Greg, Papa Bear?
Sure. I just say real quickly, thank you and much love and appreciation to my new San Antonio family. Papa Bear has introduced me to all of you. I want to say to Emma, Ramon, Sid in particular, as my elders, my younger elders, that we love you. And that this gives me hope, because I know that you all are going to carry this medicine forward, so that when you're my age and Papa Bear's age, a few years from now, we'll be looking at you and smiling and saying, we remember when. We remember when you had hair, when you had black hair, when everything was tight and right, and so because it goes by fast, right? But I just want to say thank you, allow me to share a little bit this morning, and for your energy just being encouraging. So I want to thank you for that. Now I'll turn it over to Papa Bear. So
thank you, Baba. Baba Greg, you treated me real well when I was up in Oakland, West Oakland, and when you come here, we'll give you the same, like you said, the black treatment, native red treatment, not the hospitality, but
what do you call it? Comida de casa.
Comida de casa.
I'm coming.
We'll get it. But Europeans, they try to keep us apart. They try to keep the red man and the black man apart. Those pictures that you were showing, Frederick Douglass, even Jesse Jackson, the features of Native American, I can see our people. Christus Tux, the first, they always had him as a black man that was massacred in the Boston Massacre, but he was half Native. He was a whaler. And a lot of the whaling ships were black, indigenous, Pacific Islanders, this new race that we need to always give credit to la mujer, the woman, who's able to create, and I think that's why men have always oppressed them, because they don't have that ability. I wrote a story about the year 3000, and there's no men there, and the men that are there, they're used as dry cells. So you can imagine, the kind of story it is. But all this has been a reflection. This racism is an acquired feeling. This colonization did that, so. And, like what you mentioned about those runaway slaves from Georgia, they all went to Florida, and they were accepted by the Seminoles, and the Black Seminoles moved all the way south up to here to Del Rio. There's a branch of Black Seminoles that made their way all the way, again, that route of Mexico no one talks about. So I think for us, learning history, sharing history is we have to talk about it so we don't forget, and so their children, these elders, these youngsters are going to tell their children tonight, like Luciana was talking about, like Anna was talking about, to share that in that oral tradition that has kept us alive and has kept us well. So with that, Ashe, Tamok, thank you, my brother.
No, thank you.
Much appreciated.
For our face-to-face soon.
Much appreciated, elders. Team, Emma, Sid, Frank, you want to share anything? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to, thank you guys for joining us and sharing space with us here. It's super important. We know it's early, so thank you guys, and thank you, Papa Greg, for making the connection for us to meet. Baba Greg, I'm looking forward to learning so much more from him as this relationship moves forward. Thank you, our fatherhood staff that joined, Heda. I see we got our Milpa family, so it's just awesome. It's awesome to be here with everybody. I can't wait to do more of these. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks. I think everyone has thanked everyone, so I'm gonna thank everyone again for joining us. Baba Greg, Papa Bear, you guys are super instrumental into this generation with the information and wisdom that you guys have poured out so selflessly, and super excited to hear more and to see more in the future. Emma, amazing, spectacular job. The presentation was out of this world. I believe everyone here everyone clap it up for Emma with the emojis, all of that, hearts, everything. Thank you guys so much. Raymond, of course, you're the man. That's all I can say. And Frank, you are too. Super excited to be a part of this team, and we're super excited to bring more to you guys. So be on the lookout.
Real quick, we're gonna put this on YouTube, hopefully, with the consent of everyone. If you have any anything you don't want that on there for any reason, just go ahead and feel free to let me know.
And one last thing, Moni's doing a lot of great work with OCE. I want to recommend that you guys stay tuned. We have a lot of workshops coming up. Spread the word of the work that Moni's doing. I mean, I can't express how much groundwork Moni's doing and the team to reach out. The next year is going to be a huge year for them. So be on the lookout for more presentations, more workshops. It was great to see y'all, and if there's something particular you want to see at OCE, send us an email, let us know. But Moni's doing a great job in what's being done along with the team. So thank y'all.
Yeah, much appreciated, y'all. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the praise. Thank you for all the awesomeness that you all bring, everybody on this call. So have a good rest of your day. Take care. Ashe, palabra, tamo, naletzam to you all. Thank you.
And I just one more thing. I think Frank is going to speak with Baba Greg about logistics. So,
Baba, I sent you an email.
We can chat after.
Yeah, we'll chat after.
Okay,
I'll
stay on.
Okay.
I'll stay on.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Team, stay on, please.
Thank you, Baba Greg. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that was
Wonderful.
great.
Thank you.
Yes, the team. What do they say? Teamwork make the dream work.
Yes.
Like
We'll
everybody.
see the rest of y'all later.
All right, Ramon. Thank you, man.
We'll debrief.
That's yeah, like if you need help with the presentation or anything like that in the future, you want to use something like this, like just let me know. It's my way of saying thank you for sharing the medicine and help you make it powerful.
Okay.
You do plenty of that on your own.
I will definitely be calling you about this. No, this is great.
We'll see you later, Ari.
I sent you an email, Baba, just to confirm how you wanted me to move forward on email you sent the first time, and so I can, because I'm doing it right now, so I just wanted to confirm once I get your confirmation.
Okay.
If you want it mailed out to the address that's on your